And what gets me though, when you're saying like using research for what it is, sometimes intuitive concepts and soft sciences are inevitable, and even in hard sciences, like intuitive concepts and metaphors are used, right? But it's like you get so much flack because like I'll write something and then somebody will send me an email and be like, "Well, you shouldn't have a license because you said the unconscious, and the unconscious is not evidence based." And it's like, what does that mean? Like, you guys said that the unconscious doesn't exist. We're
Right.
just the ego. That's all we are. And now you're going back and being like, well, Carl Jung was still wrong, and I'm never going to admit that. It's the same professors too. I mean, these guys have been publishing since the 80s, but now it's trendy to talk about trauma. So they're like, well, there's primary, secondary, and tertiary memory, or there's implicit memory that is nonverbal and shows
Yeah.
up as a symbol from the body brain as a trauma response. And you're like, oh, you mean like an unconscious? Like,
Right.
what this you're it's a semantic distinction, but they're not ever going to say I'm wrong or I was wrong.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, it's just so the emperor's new clothes, because guess what? You can't prove anything. Like, there is no, you can't prove anything. Everything in hard physics is a theory. Like,
Well,
it's not,
the same thing that will happen when
that's
you
just what it is.
yeah, like the same people who say, well, the unconscious doesn't have a space or whatever. I'll be like, okay, let's look at what you're writing. And I'll look on their LinkedIn article and they're like, well, self-esteem is this new concept. And you're like, self-esteem is still a metaphor. Like, you can't distill
Yeah.
this into a tube. Self-esteem's not evidence. Like,
Right.
but it's a useful metaphor that helps people understand the phenomenology of how we think and helps them break the self into parts to feel it and then get better. So if it works,
Right.
what does it matter if I can't empirically validate every single part of the process? We can study the process and see if it works. Like Exhibit A, antipsychotics. We spend all this money trying to figure out why antipsychotics work. We know they work. You're never going to tell somebody with schizophrenia who apparently schizophrenia, go off your medication, because we don't really know exactly why this works yet, right? But we spend all this money about the dopamine theory of schizophrenia. 10 years later, turns out we know less about why those work.
Right.
Now it's sensory gating is like the primary theory on it. But we spent all that money to figure out that we don't really know what our guess about why we thought it worked is wrong. But we still prescribe antipsychotics because we know that as a method, they are effective. Not as a method, they're effective, even if we don't understand exactly what's happening. So when you study IFS or EFT or any of these things, yes, you can't validate every little vocabulary word that I have to use. And most of it's going to be semantic anyway, but like, that those things are effective because a patient with PTSD went into it and then 65% of them got better on the other side versus this other model. But they don't want to do that kind of research.
Yeah.
And even the people who do research it's like they don't get that. I don't understand.
I know. Well, I think they're so defensive because you have to be so defensive about yourself to even get to be successful in that area, that it's like those people don't want to admit that the whole field is like basically a sham. I'm sorry to say.
Well, it's not even like like the thing is, like, you're going to run into intuitive concepts and metaphors in soft science inevitably, but even in very hard sciences, they're still there. I mean, you sit in 5th grade and they tell you, okay, well, here's the atom. It's a circle and it has to have the same amount of protons as electrons. And so the atom's happy when the hydrogen gets 1 electron, and then it isn't happy when it doesn't, whatever. That's all completely made up. Like, there's subshells where a particle is popping in and out of existence and you're calculating a fraction of a possibility of where it might be. The atom's not happy. It's not happy. Like, there's not a circle where there's 2 protons and then we're going to dot 2 electrons. That's what you teach people to start to understand the balance of forces in the natural world when they're in 5th grade. Like, but no one's going into, the 5th grade classroom and being like, that's not evidence-based. Why don't you, show them the CERN data? Like,